So what are your top 10 Bond films?
Oh, that's
Oh,
really
top five, top five,
top
top five.
five. Top five would be From Russia with Love and or Casino Royale. They switch one and two.
I assume you don't mean the 67 Casino
No,
Royale.
the one
Okay.
with Daniel Craig
Uh,
and The Living Daylights,
Daylights.
License
Wow,
to
interesting.
Kill,
Okay.
and uh, I was recently on a podcast. Someone else asked me, and that always gets difficult because trying to. I would probably rate. It's always that fifth one that's a little difficult. I would definitely say that
I
Dr.
love
No,
this. You're
actually,
you're you're suffering over this. This is
Dr.
great.
No might be in there. I think
Okay.
that Dr. No, even though it feels the most different because it's the oldest of the films, so it still has very much the flavors of that period. I would say fun thing about watching the Bond series is watching film change in a lot of senses. But I think that it's just a really tight movie. What
It
about
is.
you? What are your top five Bond films?
I'll tell
Because
you, and then after that, I want to say something about Doctor No. So my first favorite. So this is not a question of quality; it's a question of
hmm
which are my favorite.
hmm
Because clearly the best film in the series is From Russia with Love.
yes.
Yeah, I don't think they've topped that. My favorite is Octopussy, of course.
hmm
Just so I can hear Louis Jourdan say Octopussy,
yes.
Octopussy, Octopussy. And it's got, and that was, the first draft of that was written by George MacDonald Fraser, who wrote the
Oh,
Flashman books.
oh, I
And you
didn't
could
know
see
that.
his fingerprints all over it. I mean, it has that sort of
Yes.
international sweep. And I think Fraser was, the great historical novelist of the 20th century. And maybe, bite my tongue, maybe even the great comic novelist of the 20th century. He didn't have Woodhouse's gift for language, but Woodhouse wrote the same book 90 times.
hmm
And he wrote it beautifully. But I think I think Fraser's books are all different. So top five: Octopussy, From Russia with Love, Spy Who Loved Me, of
hmm
course. That's three. Very unpopular opinion. I love Die Another Day.
Okay, I will say Die Another Day is one of my favorite like guilty pleasure watches
Uh,
where I did a drink along watch for my birthday like 2 years ago, and it was one of
we
the
have to
most
know each other
amazing
better because this
experiences
will
of
be
my
fun.
life.
When were you drinking? When he?
We were drinking alternating between whiskey and seltzer.
No. But what was making you? What
Oh,
was the
so there's a
trigger?
whole contest like game rules, and it's like anytime he says Bond, James Bond, anytime there's an
Uh,
innuendo, anytime, which in that movie there's a lot of innuendo. Um,
they were so horny when they wrote that movie.
oh my goodness, it was amazing. I can't remember. Those were like the big ones, and I was very
So I love it because it has the sword fight,
the
and you
sword
would have
fight's so
thought
good.
it's wonderful because they go from type of sword to type of sword to type of sword, and it has this great sort of logical progression.
Mhm.
And you learn a lot about the characters as they fight and how they fight.
hmm
And it escalates from type of weapon to type. And I love it to
I
pieces.
think Toby
And I like,
Stevens is an underrated villain too for the Bond franchise.
oh, I think he's great because he's the man who wants to be James Bond. I mean,
hmm
who's your worst nightmare? The guy who's just like you. And then, believe it or not, Live and Let Die. I think Live and Let Die is
It's
just
really good.
fabulous. I just
Uh,
love that.
I heard someone say that every Bond's like first scene says everything you need to know about who they're going to be in the series. And Roger Moore trying to hide a girl from his boss as the first scene of him as Bond says everything you need to know about the rest of his tenure as Bond.
Yeah. So you were talking about Dr. No. A couple of years ago, I'd written a book, or I co-wrote a book called "It Came From," which
Hmm.
was about the literary antecedents of famous movies, mostly horror and
Ooh.
science fiction movies. And I wrote a lot about Dr. No. And as you know, Dr. No, the novel, which I'm sure you're familiar with, it's just sort of like Ian Fleming writing a sex romance novel. I mean, this is his
Mhm.
Fu Manchu book. And
Yes.
as you remember, Dr. No in the book is very different from Dr. No in the movie. He has pinchers instead of hands, and he doesn't blink, and he's completely bald. And at one point, he's always draped in these flowing yellow Oriental robes, and Bond is convinced that he's like a slug underneath, and there should be a trail of slime behind him. I mean, the whole thing is just it's so sexual, and the road from book to movie was very 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 long, and there
Hmm.
were, everybody in the whole world was touted for this, and at one point, they were thinking about, and I just love this. I mean, if you close your eyes and think of an alternate reality, it would have been James Mason as Bond and Basil Rathbone as Doctor
Hmm.
No. The problem with that is that it would have been the end of an era, I think, as opposed to the beginning of an era. But
Yes.
what an end of an era that would have been. With Tony Doctor No, the stealing NATO missiles compensate for the loss of your hands. I mean, it would just. We'd be talking about it now, even if they had only done one. It's
Hmm.
a great. It's a missed opportunity, I think.